Please go ahead and open up your Bibles to the book of Job. And it's been a pleasure to be with all of you. Getting to know you guys has been a blessing to my life. Thank you so much for the kindness and the hospitality. Pat and Donna have been great. Getting good conversations with all of you has been really encouraging to me. Hannah and I are going to be leaving for Mount Pleasant tonight, just to shave off about an hour and a half of the road trip tomorrow. So I thank you for the prayers. Appreciate if you guys could continue to pray for that as I'm on my way out. Can you believe that these things used to be like 3 weeks long? Have you ever talked to some of the older brethren that would talk about gospel meetings and how there'd be lots of conversions and they'd do it in the tents? In fact, there's a little country community outside of where we live that does a tent meeting every year. And I spoke at that last year, and I thought that those things were dead. I know a lot of you are exhausted after just a few days. I don't know if I've ever done a meeting where the disparity of where people drive from is so far. And so that doesn't go unnoticed, and I hope that none of this has been a waste of time to you guys, that this has been good for us to get in the Word, think about these things together. I know that you guys have made an impact on me and encouraged me in my walk in the Lord. We're going to talk about Job tonight. Have you ever had a time where you shared some kind of burden or struggle and somebody one-upped your suffering? You got vulnerable and you opened up with somebody and they said, well, my life is worse because of this or that. And the only thing that you needed to do is have somebody listen to you. It's not generally very comforting for us to have somebody one-up our suffering, but there is something comforting about knowing that things could always be worse than they are. And if there's anybody in the Bible, in the Old Testament rather, if there's anybody in the Old Testament that has the right to show us that truth, I think it would be Job. How do you handle your trials and afflictions? There's that phrase, the patience of Job, or the steadfastness of Job. The scripture reading came from James chapter 5, and I'm going to go just a couple verses further into what the scripture reading was, and just use this to frame what we're looking at tonight. James chapter 5, verses 10 and 11. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you've seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Now, we're going to, Lord willing, get to this end part. The Lord is compassionate and merciful. Have you ever read the book of Job and gone, wow, God is compassionate and merciful? That's not the thing that flies off the page for me. So we're going to come back to that at the end. But James is saying to an audience that's been scattered from their homeland. The first couple of verses of the book says that they've been scattered. They're suffering. They have friendship issues in chapter 4. They have health issues in chapter 5. They're going through all kinds of different things. And what James is saying in the midst of this is, go back and read Jeremiah and look at the suffering that he endured. Go back and read Hosea and look at the suffering he endured. Look specifically at Job, and we understand that people who have endured hardships are blessed. We don't look at people who quit through hardship and go, what a blessed person. No, we look at people that endured and gone, there's a blessing in what that person endured and how they got through that. Let me say what James is saying it from another way. Have you obeyed this passage? That when you're going through suffering, pray, yes, do that, but don't ever neglect deep Bible study. Can I say it that way? You, audience of James, going through all kinds of difficulties, go back and read books of the Bible that are oftentimes ignored or put to the side by Christians in the United States today. And so what I want us to do is look at Job and consider how we could learn to be more steadfast. What does it mean to be steadfast? The mental image that I've had for a while is the Greek god Atlas, who held up the earth. And I don't know if that's where the phrase, don't drop the ball, comes from, but that would sure make sense if that's where that came from. If he drops the ball, we're dead. Of course, he's not a real god. But it's the idea that you're bearing up under lots of pressure, and you're not giving up and not giving in. You know you're being steadfast when you don't justify sin, no matter how hard things are getting. So let's see what Job does. And of course, he's not perfect. But the book of Job, the first 2 chapters go between things on earth and things in the heavenly realm, and things on earth and the things in the heavenly realm. And we know from the beginning of the book that Job is somebody who fears God and turns away from evil. He's a godly man. If you would spend time around him, he would encourage your holiness. And it's not just that he's got good character, he's got an enviable farm, 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. So he's really rich, he's really godly, and he also has to have like the perfect family, 7 sons and 3 daughters. As we keep reading this or get into this, we'll see that his kids got along with one another. I got 4 kids. You want to know one of the things that really breaks my heart is when my kids don't get along with each other. These 10 kids get along with each other. And that's actually going to be the occasion upon which they die. But we'll get to that in a moment. All right, so this guy, this is how he's introduced, which is going to make him the perfect candidate for what happens. Look at Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 11. If that was his description on earth, here's the things happening in the heavenly realm. Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 11. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking up and down on it." The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." There's a lot of questions about this text that I don't know that I'll have answers to in this life. God is depicted as this ruler that has like a cabinet or like a council that he consults with. Not that he needs to do that, but there's times in the Bible that he does. And it's in this heavenly council that God initiates this conversation with Satan. Satan, you've been going to here, there, and yonder. You probably went down to Georgia and you came back. And all the places that you went, did you notice Job? That Job is a guy that's blameless and upright, and he fears me, all of these different sorts of things. And you notice that Satan doesn't disagree with God's assessment of Job, that he does fear God. But he does have a difference of opinion on why Job is a godly man. And Satan's accusation here to God is, the reason that he serves you is because you've filled his life with goodies. You're like the cosmic gumball machine, and you keep popping out blessings to Job. And if that was the deal that somebody had with you, God, they would serve you. Wouldn't it just be great to serve God and he gives you everything you wanted? Do you think there'd be a lot more people in this world that would serve him? Satan's interpretation of all of this is if you let me disrupt Job's life, he'll curse you to your face. What does it mean to curse God to his face? Does it just mean to say like, "Oh, I hate you" or something? I don't think so. I think it's the idea of forsaking your relationship with God. He'll curse you. He'll say he's done with you. He won't have any interest in you anymore. Look at what God does in verse 12. "And the Lord said to Satan, 'Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand.' So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord." Could you ask yourself this question? If everything that you are building in your life was taken away from you, would you shake your fist at God and say, "I'm done with you"? Would you serve God if you had no earthly blessing? Or do you look at God as some kind of gumball machine that's supposed to keep giving you things that you want and then I'll serve you? Or do you see that God is worthy of being served no matter what happens on earth? I like that the book of Job begins by describing how godly of a man he is. Have you ever had some kind of hardship happen in your life and your default assumption is that it's because you did something wrong? Is that sometimes the reason bad things happen to people? That's sometimes the reason. But then the book of Job comes along and says, but that's not always the reason. I'm not one of those preachers that needs everything to start with the same letter, but whenever it works, it does help for memories purposes. But there's 4 things in Job's life that get disrupted, and all of them begin with the letter F. Look at the first one. with his finances in Job chapter 1, starting in verse 13 through 17. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Now we're going to come back to what happens to the children, but you notice that in verse 13, all the children are getting along with each other. That's going to be the context in which they die. We'll get to that in a moment. Look at verse 14. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Do you see this phrase, I alone have escaped to tell you? It's like Satan in his wickedness in this situation is allowing one messenger to survive each of these calamities. And it's like the first one comes up to Job and says, oh, these people did this. And then the second one, there was this act of God that happened. And then this third one. And in one moment, he's learned that his 401k has been liquidated. Your wealth in this culture, for any farmer today, your wealth is bound up in the animals. You shear the sheep, then you sell wool. You milk the cow like every day, and you sell that, and you make money off of that. So all of your wealth is bound up in this. In one moment, all of his animals have been destroyed. Do you remember when this 2008 stock market crash happened? Where there was people that had all of their hope bound up on Wall Street. And there's some people that lost everything in the course of a day. And they literally hung themselves in their apartments, killed themselves, because everything that they were putting their hope on was gone. When I lived in California, there was a family. Have you ever known one of those kind of families where it's like there's always something bad happening to them, and it's not always because they did something bad? There was a family like that in California. And there was one day when I was getting together with the husband, and I was like, so what's the news today? And he said, well, it's funny that you ask because our debit card was stolen. And which is harder to get that money back. If it's a credit card, you say, I didn't ever make that charge. But if your debit card is stolen, now you're in the business of trying to get money back. If something like that happened to you, if in your workplace you had to bow the knee to some worldly idea to keep your job, do you think these kinds of things are not unrealistic in our culture today, that there's going to be Christians that are going to be devoted to the Lord and they're going to be willing to lose their jobs because of the kind of ungodly environment that they're in? Would you be willing to do that? That's the first thing that gets disrupted in Job's life. The second one is his family. And this can be subdivided into 2 different things. Look at verses 18 and 19. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house. And it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Now, after his finances are taken away, somebody might come up to Job and say, well, Job, at least you still have your family. Except you don't now. Try to imagine you've got all of the kids, all 10 kids getting along, and they're in this house, and something like a tornado comes and destroys them. When Samantha and I were in California, our firstborn was born there, and our second. And in between those 2, she had a miscarriage. And it happened early at like 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And I woke up, and she wasn't in bed, and I went out to the living room where she just gave birth to a child that will, Lord willing, see in the afterlife one day. That's hard. That's hard enough when it's one child, but that you haven't even really talked to or anything like that. Can you imagine 10 grown children all in the same moment? When Samantha and I first moved to Nashville, there was a guy at the church. He's 36 years old, and he had AIDS. Now, if I tell you that there's a 36-year-old with AIDS, what's our automatic assumption? He did something wrong, right? Well, remember, Job, some of your suffering's not because you did anything wrong. This kid was born with hemophilia. And when he was 7 or 8 or 9, he had a blood transfusion. And the blood donor had AIDS. And so for the rest of his life, he's going to have all kinds of suffering. And he dies when he's 36 years old, a couple weeks after we moved there. And I start meeting with the father every week. He doesn't once shake his fist at God. Instead, he says, this makes me all the more want to see my son and the Lord in the afterlife. If something tragic happened to one of your children, would you keep serving God? It's not just Job's children, though. Look at Mrs. Job. Skip over for a moment to chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Do you notice that Mrs. Job becomes the mouthpiece of Satan? What was it that Satan said in chapter 1? Hey, God, if you let me disrupt Job's life, he'll curse you. What is she telling Job to do in verse 9? Curse him, curse him, curse him. I still have a negative view of Mrs. Job, but it's not as negative as it used to be. I think Mrs. Job has compassion on Job, but it's misguided compassion. Do you think she's suffering right now? She's lost her finances. She's lost her children too. And for her to say, Job, curse God and die, would be like saying, Job, how much more of this can we take? Just tell God you're done. He'll send a lightning bolt and a mercy killing and have you done for. And then my life will be cleared from all this suffering as well. I think it's misguided compassion. But do you know what a godly spouse does for you? They tell you to keep doing the right thing no matter how difficult things are. Do you think there's some people that, given enough time, married to somebody that's going to keep discouraging their faith, that there could be kind of a trickle effect, and they're eventually going to stop serving God the way that they ought to? If something happened to your family, whether it's your children or your spouse not supporting your faith, would you keep doing the right thing? Well, here's the next one, is Job's flesh. If you go back in this context, we see a little bit about why Mrs. Job said this in the immediate text. Look at Job chapter 2, verses 4 through 8. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. All right, Job, you lost your finances. You still have your family. Sorry about that. At least you still have your health. Sorry about that. Do you notice what Satan's theory is in this passage? All right, God. People can have a lot of things disrupted in their life, but if their health gets affected, they're going to go bananas. Do you think that's true? Do you think that theory is true that Satan has? That people can withstand a lot of difficulties, but if you start having somebody's health get messed up or threatened, if I can say it that way, there's going to be a lot of godly people that are going to lose their minds. Of all the things that Satan could do to Job, he gives him boils. You ever had a boil? Excruciatingly painful. All over his body. And while Job is there scraping off dead skin off of his body, he's still not cursing God. Since I've become a Christian in 2008, I've gone to different Christian bookstores. You see that thing there? And I've tried to see what are some of the different kinds of books religious people are reading. And every couple of years, there's a new theme of books that come out, and one guy picks up on what somebody else is writing, and then they all write about these different things. And so a few years back, there was a series of books that different authors were writing that were about unlocking biblical texts that are going to teach you how to be physically healthy. So there was the Daniel fast book, that if you eat like Daniel does, you'll be healthy, which is not the point of Daniel chapter 1. And then there's another book, Body Built by God. And if you unlock all these things, then you'll be healthy, and ooh, cool. And then Job throws a wrench into all of that. A godly man, and his health gets utterly messed up. If something happened to your health, would you use it as an excuse to walk away from the Lord? How about this one? His friends. Job chapter 2, verse 11. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. I have to think, by the way, that these friends are good friends. We remember them as being really bad friends because they end up being bad, but at least at this point, they want to show him sympathy and comfort him. And people were very superstitious back then. Can you imagine coming up to somebody sitting in ashes, scraping dead skin off? If people even joke today, if you're standing next to somebody who's saying something really prideful, like, oh, let me step away so that the lightning doesn't strike me too. Can you imagine going up to Job in this social context? What kind of friend do you have to be? Like a really good friend. And their problem came when they started opening up their yappers. Look at Job's explanation of them in Job 16, verses 1 and 2. Job summarizes them like this in Job 16, 1 and 2. Then Job answered and said, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. You guys just stink. Well, what was so bad about them? They come and they say, Job, the only reason bad things ever happen to somebody is because you did something wrong. Some really bad things have happened to you. So you've done something really wrong. So tell us what that is. Have you ever had somebody try to give you advice? Like you open up about something that you're struggling with, and they immediately start giving you advice, which is implying if you would have just done this or that, you wouldn't be in that situation. Sometimes we need advice, but sometimes we don't. And guys are the worst at this, where they just immediately go to fixing things, and sometimes they just have to listen to people and sympathize and comfort with them. Now, when I was a pretty new convert, my best friend from junior high and high school, I had started having Bible studies with. And there was one day when he was over at my house, and I had to leave, and he stayed out at my house for a little while. And that was a normal thing in my family, where my mom and dad got to know my friends pretty well. And so I had to go to work, and my friend Brian was still at our house. And after that day, Brian stopped talking to me. And I went to my mom and I said, hey, Mom, do you know why Brian won't talk to me anymore? And she said, yeah, I'll tell you exactly why he don't talk to you no more. I told him you joined a cult, and I told him to stop talking to you. Can you imagine your mom? And like the hurt that it would have that your best friend, and he's not even a Christian yet. You know what's really, really hard? That's hard, but you know what's even harder than that? Is when people at church let you down. People that we have the expectation that we love the Lord and serve the Lord together. How many people have walked away from the Lord because their friends at church let them down? That happened to you? Would you shake your fist at God and say, I'm done with him? Here are the 4 things that get disrupted in Job's life, which gets us to the question, was Satan right? Was Satan right that God, if you let me do whatever you want me to do, anything you allow me to do to his life, he's gonna be done with you? Well, here's how the book of Job ends. And you can start turning to chapter 42, and I'll look at a passage there in just a moment. But at the end of the book of Job, God comes and takes Job on a trip to the zoo. Have you seen the ostrich? Have you seen Leviathan? Have you seen all of these different animals? Job, your challenge in the book, if you did anything wrong, Job, it's that you started demanding answers from me. And what I'm going to show you is that I'm in control of this world. I take care of the animals. I bring rain in desert places. You go read chapters 38 to 42, and you're seeing that God is doing all kinds of things in this world that we have no idea about. We don't even know what's happening in the house next door, and we think that we can challenge God and say that we think we know better how this world works, or at least we think we should be able to demand answers from him. If there's anything that Job did that he shouldn't have done, it was making these kinds of demands. And God humbles Job by showing him all of these different things. Look at Job chapter 42, verses 5 and 6. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. This is a key text to the book of Job. Job, before he's received anything back, is going to repent in dust and ashes. He doesn't have anything doubled back to him. We're going to say more about the receiving all these blessings at the end. If the question was, Job, would you serve God for nothing if you had nothing? In dust and ashes, he repents even of challenging God and realizes that he's got no place to question him. If you were sitting in dust and ashes, would you have that kind of humble spirit before God, or would you be demanding things from him? If Satan took your name to God in the heavenly realm, and whatever your name is, and said, God, I bet I could get that person to curse you. Just let me mess up that life enough and they'll do it. Would Satan be right with you? Do you remember, though, how we had talked at the beginning of this lesson from the book of James, how James chapter 5 said that you've seen the mercy and the compassion of God in the book of Job? This doesn't... how do we see this in the book of Job? Well, if I could loop some other things from the book of James into this, if the book of James ends by talking about steadfastness, it begins by talking about the same thing. Look at James chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. James talks about the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. How many of us want to be perfect, complete, lacking nothing? I would sure like that. Perfect, complete, lacking nothing sounds pretty cool to me. Well, how do I become that? By having steadfastness. And as I'm continually steadfast in the Lord, it's going to cause me to grow. All right, every January, people start going to the gyms. And so I've had periods of my time where I've sort of tried to work out. And I had some friends in Bowling Green that showed me how to lift properly and all this kind of stuff, and I didn't stick with it very long. But it's funny because they say, this is how working out works. This makes you stronger. Okay, well, let me get those dumbbells. And I go, ooh, 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 ooh. And I'm supposed to do that 10 times, right? And they go, yeah, 10 times. Okay, and then I set it down and I'm kind of sore. Like, do that 2 more times. Okay. The sensation I feel is that my arms are getting weaker. Like, it keeps getting harder and harder to do it. And yet you're telling me this makes me stronger when the sensation I have is that I'm getting weaker right now. So how does this make me stronger? Because I feel like I'm getting weaker. Have you ever felt that way spiritually? You keep enduring and you're steadfast and you're not giving in to momentary pleasures of sin as a release valve for this suffering that you're going through right now. And you feel like you're getting weaker and weaker and weaker, but you're not giving up. And you're being steadfast. The sensation in the moment might be that you feel like you're getting weaker. But if you're steadfast, you're actually getting stronger. You ever experienced that before? Where in hindsight you could look back at some difficulty you went through and you didn't give up and you didn't give in. And after it was all done, you had a certain kind of character that had grown through everything. There's an 83-year-old widow that I talk to in California. I call her a couple times a week. Her husband was a preacher and she was heavily involved in her husband's work, and she's just a very wise person. And she's described to me that there are some people that are like sandpaper. They're really, have you ever thought about this with sandpaper? It's really rough, but it makes things smooth. Have you ever had people in your life that were really rough, or circumstances in your life that were really rough, but it made you smoother? That's the idea. Do you think it's God's mercy that He lets us grow through our difficulties? I think so. So that's one way that we see God's mercy, but here's another one. In Job chapter 42, Job is blessed in his latter days. Look at towards the end of this book in verses 12 and 13. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camel, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And the daughters are named in verse 14, and that's some cool names if you want some names for daughters. Job was blessed in his latter days. Did you notice in this text what's doubled? You notice that the animals are doubled, but did you notice what's not doubled in verse 13? The children. Have you ever wondered why the animals were doubled, but the children were not doubled? This is, I think, one of the dim hints in the book of Job to an afterlife. The first set of animals that died, are they gone forever? Yeah, they're gone forever. The first 10 children that died, are they gone forever? No. God does double his children. The first 10 are lost physically, but not eternally. The second set of 10, God is, I think, showing by this that everything was doubled in Job's life, even his children, because there is an afterlife. Now, I had a friend who, when he was in California, his wife was cheating on him. And he knew it from the beginning and endured this for 2 years. And he kept pleading with her, I will take you back if you stop seeing this guy. And she kept saying, no, no, no. And it came to a point where he told her, I'm giving you 3 more months, and if you stop seeing him, I will still take you back. And those 3 months came to an end, and she still wanted to see the guy. Leading up to the end of those 3 months, my friend would get on his motorcycle at night and he would pray to God and say, God, if you can direct a semi-truck to hit me, then may it be so. And he would get on his motorcycle and he'd start reciting to himself, there's a Job 42, there's a Job 42, there's a Job 42, there's a Job 42. What he did not mean by that was that in this life everything was going to be reversed. But he longed for this place where eternally and ultimately all the sorrows and all the suffering that you go through here are going to be more than reversed. And this hint of the 10 extra children at the end and the doubling of all the animals is a dim proof, even in the book of Job, the first book of the Bible written, that there is an afterlife. Do you think Job, after he received all of this stuff back, had a renewed perspective on what he had? My best friend in Bowling Green, he's almost 80, and he's been in the hospital for the last 2 weeks with heart issues. He had cancer 30 years ago and was told that he had about 2 months to live. And he was pretty well off at that point in his life and had to, in his mind, check out as if everything had been lost. And then when he ended up surviving it, do you think it changed his perspective on what he had? One of the most humble and wealthy people I've ever known at the same time, and that combo is hard to find. Do you think it's God's mercy that there's going to be greater blessings in the latter days? We don't deserve that. But if you're going through some kind of difficulty, some kind of trial that may not seem like it's ever going to end in this life, there are blessings in the latter days. And I think all of this with Job looks forward to Jesus. Jesus had no finances. He had nowhere to lay his head at night. His family thought that he was out of his mind. His flesh was torn open when he was on the cross, and most of his friends forsook him in his most trying moment. And I think Job, through the eyes of faith, looked forward to that, where he says in Job 19:25, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth." One final thing to say about this. Who understood or understands more about God? Job in the days in which he lived, or you sitting here right now? I would say that it's us. Job didn't have the panoramic plan of salvation. He prophesied and knew that somehow there's going to be a Redeemer that would come. He didn't know the plans and the details of all of that. We sit here and having all of that information. So if we can think about it like this, Job had a very narrow understanding of God. And with that narrow understanding, did not curse him. We have a much wider understanding of who he is. And with that wider understanding, who are we to ever curse God? I've appreciated so much your good attention and the effort of all of you to come out and think about these things together. You guys have been a big encouragement to me, and I'm thankful to God that you guys invited me to be here to spend this time with you. If there's anybody here tonight, though, that needs some kind of encouragement, if you've not become a Christian, why have you not? If you have become a Christian, but you've cursed God, or you've slowed down in your zeal for Him, get that right in your life. If there's anything that we can do for you, please come forward while we stand, while we sing.